The untold story of Elizabeth Taylor's four children. Elizabeth Taylor belonged to the world, but four children belonged to her. To millions, she was Cleopatra, Maggie, or Martha, seductress, fighter, survivor. But to four young lives, she was simply Mom. And behind the glamour, beyond the magazine covers, their stories unfolded, quietly, painfully, often in the spaces where her spotlight couldn't reach. Born in London in 1932, Elizabeth crossed an ocean and walked straight into legend. MGM signed her at 10. By 12, she was a star. But childhood left early. Stardom replaced it. Over the decades, she became more than famous. She became a phenomenon. 8 marriages, 2 Oscars, 1 unforgettable gaze. And yet, between the scandals and the scripts, she became a mother. Not once, but 4 times. Each child born into a different chapter. Each one shaped by her brilliance and its costs. Michael Wilding Jr., born 1953. He was the first to call her mom. Michael Howard Wilding Jr. arrived just after the cameras began to truly love his mother. Born in 1953, he was the product of a union Elizabeth hoped might bring her calm. A marriage to British actor Michael Wilding that offered her, briefly, a sense of ordinary. But fame doesn't co-parent. Michael grew up in a whirlwind. His early memories were painted in bright flashes, paparazzi, premieres, film sets. He lived in houses with velvet drapes and voices that echoed down long marble halls. His father moved back to London after the divorce. His mother moved on to more husbands, more drama, more spotlight. Michael grew up with a revolving door of father figures, each leaving a different imprint. Richard Burton, the loudest and longest-lasting, called him son. But the word father never quite settled. As a young man, Michael tried to step into the world his mother had ruled. Acting roles came his way, not because he demanded them, but because his name opened doors. He played parts on television, dipped into film, but the work felt hollow. The industry didn't ask who he was. It only asked who his mother was. By the 1990s, he'd had enough. He moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, a place where no one cared about MGM royalty. There, he found his hands. Sculpture became his escape, his meditation. Working with stone, he said, was an act of subtraction, a revealing, not a construction. It became a quiet rebellion against a life where everything had once been spectacle. Michael became a father himself to Naomi, Tarquin, and Layla. Each of them has continued the Taylor legacy in their own way. Naomi directs a gallery and speaks on AIDS awareness. Tarquin tells stories through art and advocacy, but Michael remains rooted in the Southwest, surrounded by his work, untouched by fame. A man who left the camera to find shape in silence. Christopher Wilding, born 1955. He was the quieter child, and maybe the wisest. Christopher Edward Wilding was born in 1955, a time when Elizabeth Taylor was becoming less of a rising star and more of a cinematic force. But at home, the ground was already shifting. By the time Christopher turned 2, the divorce papers had been signed. He lived in the gap between luxury and longing, surrounded by opulence but aching for consistency. The tabloids charted his mother's every move, from Eddie Fisher to Richard Burton, from yacht to hospital, and Christopher learned to decode her life from magazine stands. He called it catching up. As a teenager, he was packed off to boarding school in Europe. He was mocked not for who he was, but for who she was. And still, he refused to hate her. He later said, "She was trying, but that was enough for me." Rather than step onto the stage, Christopher stepped behind it. He became a sound editor and assistant director, crafting worlds that spoke without needing a spotlight. His fingerprints are on classics like Overboard, Judgment Night, and Tombstone. He knew how to tell stories, just not his own. Christopher married into another dynasty when he wed Aileen Getty. They adopted Caleb, had a second son, Andrew. The marriage ended quietly. Later, he married Margaret Carlton, also in the sound industry, and had a third son, Lowell. He is now a trustee of his mother's estate. It is not a job of glamour. It is a job of preservation, of honoring, protecting, managing the memory of a woman the world still mythologizes. But for Christopher, it is also personal. It is an act of understanding. He does not give interviews often, but when he does, his words are measured, reflective, honest. Fame, he said, is a deal with the devil that's really not worth it. Liza Todd, born 1957. She lost her father before she could walk, and she never looked back. Elizabeth Frances Todd, called Liza, was born in 1957, the only child of Elizabeth Taylor and producer Mike Todd. For a fleeting moment, their union was blissful. Lavish, yes, but joyful. When Liza was born, Elizabeth said she finally felt complete. 7 months later, Mike Todd's plane went down in New Mexico. He was 48. Liza was still learning to crawl. Grief did not allow for stillness. Elizabeth married Eddie Fisher the following year, then Richard Burton. It was Burton who would legally adopt Liza, raising her as his own. She called him Dad. She called Mike Todd Father. Liza never craved the spotlight. Her siblings experimented with it. She retreated from it. Animals became her companions, sketch pads, her diaries. She understood motion, muscle, anatomy. She watched horses the way others watched film. She studied at Hornsey College of Art, then Otis Institute. In studios lit by natural light and warmed by torch fire, she became a sculptor. Her work, horses frozen mid-stride, wildlife rendered with empathy, found its way into galleries, not because of her last name, but despite it. Liza married journalist Hap Tivey in 1984. They had 2 sons, Quinn and Reese. The family lived quietly, far from Los Angeles. In 2003, the marriage ended, but Liza stayed in upstate New York, living with her dogs, her sculptures, and her past, kept at a distance. Her son Quinn has emerged into public life. As a trustee of the House of Taylor, he honors his grandmother's legacy with the kind of poise she might have admired. He says, "She was grandma, not the legend." Liza has rarely given interviews. She rarely appears at events, but her work speaks for her. And in that silence, there is clarity. Maria Burton, born 1961. She was not born to Elizabeth. She was chosen. Maria Burton came into the world in 1961 in a Munich orphanage. Her birth records are sparse, her biological parents unnamed. But in 1964, Elizabeth Taylor began the process to adopt her. At the time, she was still married to Eddie Fisher. By the time it was finalized, she was with Richard Burton, who also adopted Maria as his own. Maria's early life was marked by medical charts and surgeries. Born with a congenital hip condition, she underwent more than 20 operations by her teens. Hospital beds replaced nurseries. Her world was sterile, aching, quiet. Elizabeth stayed by her side, not the movie star, the mother, the woman who combed her hair gently before surgery, who held her hand through pain, who whispered, "You're mine." Maria did not chase fame. She walked past it. She studied design, married Steve Carson in 1981. Together, they built a boutique talent agency. Their daughter, Eliza, was born later that year. After nearly 20 years, the marriage ended. Maria married again to Tom McCown and had a second child, Richard. That marriage, too, would dissolve, but motherhood never did. She raised her children with intention, away from lights, away from flash. In a world that had never given her privacy, she created it for them. Today, Eliza Carson speaks publicly about her grandmother's legacy, standing on stages Maria once peeked at from the wings. Maria remains mostly out of sight, present, but never demanding attention. Of all Elizabeth Taylor's children, Maria carried her mother's compassion most purely, not her fire, but her warmth. 4 children, 4 lives, 4 separate orbits caught in the gravity of a singular star. Michael found shape in stone. Christopher found order in sound. Liza found form in bronze. Maria found grace in privacy. They did not ask to be born into a myth, but they found ways to live beyond it. Elizabeth Taylor dazzled the world, but her truest legacy is not in diamonds or films. It is in the quiet resilience of her children. They did not chase fame. They walked beside it, and they found themselves. If this story spoke to you, if you saw something familiar in the struggle, the silence, or the survival, don't let it fade. Share this story. Subscribe for more Untold Legacies. Because the children of legends are more than footnotes, they're stories worth remembering.